The crystalline spires of Vexoria's capital city gleamed in the light of the twin suns as Jonathan Reed adjusted his atmospheric regulator. After 3 years of studying the Vexorian language from Earth transmissions, he was finally here, the first human linguistic anthropologist invited to the diplomatic summit. "Breathtaking, isn't it?" said Commander Patel, the military attaché assigned to his security detail. "Just remember the briefing. The Vexorians are ritualistic. Every gesture has meaning." Jonathan nodded, straightening his formal diplomatic attire. "That's precisely why I'm here. To ensure we don't accidentally declare war by using the wrong fork at dinner." The hover transport glided through the alien metropolis, eventually coming to rest at the base of the tallest structure, the Hall of Celestial Dialogue, where representatives from 12 galactic systems had gathered to discuss trade agreements with the technologically advanced Vexorians. Inside, the air shimmered with a sweet, metallic scent. Beings of various forms mingled in the great hall, their translators creating a cacophony of overlapping languages. Jonathan felt a rush of professional excitement. This was linguistic anthropology at its finest, real-time cross-species communication. "Ambassador Reed," a melodic voice called from behind him. Jonathan turned to find himself face to face with a Vexorian. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, her iridescent skin shifting between shades of purple and blue. 4 arm-like appendages emerged gracefully from her torso, and her large, almond-shaped eyes were a startling silver. "I'm not actually an ambassador," Jonathan corrected politely. "Just a linguistic consultant." The Vexorian tilted her head, the gesture causing the elaborate headdress of woven metal and gems to shimmer. "In our language, one who speaks for others is Kivrath, closest translation, ambassador of words." Jonathan smiled. "Then I accept the title." "And you are?" "I am Talia, first voice of the Eastern Dominion." She extended her upper right hand in what appeared to be a greeting. Jonathan hesitated, recalling his briefing. Physical contact with Vexorians was rare and usually ceremonial. Yet she had initiated. He gently took her hand, noticing the slight electric tingle where their skin met. "Your command of our language patterns is impressive," Talia said, her silver eyes studying him intently. "Most species require multiple translation matrices." "Languages are my passion," Jonathan replied. "I've studied yours for 3 years." Talia's skin rippled with a pattern that Jonathan recognized as pleasure. "Then you must join me for the ceremony of first dialogue. It is intimate by your standards, but would greatly honor the human delegation." Before Jonathan could respond, Commander Patel appeared at his side, looking anxious. "Mr. Reed, the Earth ambassador wishes to speak with you." "Of course," Jonathan said, then turned back to Talia. "If you'll excuse me." "The ceremony begins at the rising of the second sun," Talia said, then reached into a pocket in her flowing robes. "Please, accept this token of diplomatic intention." She held out a small crystal that seemed to contain swirling blue light. Jonathan, remembering the briefing about refusing gifts being a grave insult, accepted it with a small bow. "Thank you. It's beautiful." Talia's skin flashed a brilliant purple. "The union is acknowledged," she said cryptically, then glided away into the crowd. Commander Patel stared at the crystal in Jonathan's hand, her face suddenly pale. "Sir, do you realize what you've just done?" "Accepted a diplomatic gift, as per protocol," Jonathan replied, admiring the way the crystal caught the light. "That's not a gift," Commander Patel whispered urgently. "That's a Krithvier crystal. By accepting it and acknowledging its beauty, you've just..." She swallowed hard. "According to Vexorian custom, you've just accepted a marriage proposal." Jonathan's fingers went numb. The crystal slipped from his grasp, but instead of falling, it hovered, then attached itself to his chest, glowing brighter as it melded with the fabric of his uniform. "That can't be right," he stammered, trying unsuccessfully to remove the crystal. "There must be some mistake." But across the hall, Talia was surrounded by other Vexorians, all touching her shoulders in what appeared to be congratulatory gestures, their skin rippling with patterns of celebration as they looked in Jonathan's direction. "No mistake, sir," Commander Patel said grimly. "According to Vexorian law, you are now married to one of their highest-ranking diplomats." "This is unprecedented," Ambassador Wilson declared, pacing the conference room of the Earth Embassy. His face had turned an alarming shade of red over the past hour of emergency deliberations. "Reed, how could you accept a marriage proposal without consulting the diplomatic corps?" Jonathan sat with his head in his hands, the crystal still firmly attached to his chest, emitting a soft blue glow that pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. "Sir, with all due respect, I had no idea what it was. The briefing materials mentioned refusing gifts as an insult, but nothing about marriage crystals." Dr. Fernandez, the mission's cultural anthropologist, looked up from her tablet. "That's because Krithva ceremonies are traditionally performed only between high-status Vexorians. There was no precedent for offering one to an off-worlder." "Well, there's a precedent now," Wilson muttered. "And it's causing an interstellar incident." The door slid open, and Commander Patel entered with 3 Vexorian officials. Their skin patterns shifted rapidly. Jonathan recognized the colors of formality, tension, and something he couldn't quite identify. "The High Council requests the presence of Jonathan Reed and his new life mate," the tallest Vexorian announced. "The binding ceremony must be completed within 1 rotation of the twin suns." Ambassador Wilson stepped forward. "There seems to be a misunderstanding. On Earth, marriage requires explicit consent and prior agreement. Mr. Reed was unaware of the significance of accepting the crystal." The Vexorians exchanged glances, their skin patterns shifting to deep indigo, the color of confusion. "But he spoke the ritual words," said the female Vexorian. "He acknowledged the beauty of Talia's life essence contained within the crystal. The union has been witnessed by representatives of 12 systems." "I was being polite," Jonathan protested. "In human culture, we compliment gifts." The Vexorian's skin rippled with what Jonathan now recognized as distress. To revoke a Krithva acceptance would bring terrible dishonor to First Voice Talia. Her position in the council would be forfeit. The trade negotiations would collapse. Ambassador Wilson's face grew even redder. "Are you suggesting our linguistic consultant must remain married to salvage the diplomatic mission?" "The alternative would be problematic," the Vexorian said carefully. "The Eastern Dominion might interpret it as Earth's deliberate attempt to shame them. It could set our relations back decades." Jonathan stood up, the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. "May I speak with Talia? Perhaps we can find a solution that preserves her honor without requiring an actual marriage." "She awaits you in the Garden of Contemplation," the female Vexorian replied. "I will escort you." The Garden of Contemplation proved to be a vast, domed structure filled with bioluminescent plants that responded to movement by changing colors. In the center, beside a pool of silver liquid, stood Talia. Her usual elaborate robes had been replaced by simpler attire, and her headdress was absent, revealing a crown of delicate, crystalline structures that Jonathan realized were part of her anatomy. "Jonathan Reed," she said as he approached. "You are troubled." "Talia," he began awkwardly, "there's been a misunderstanding. On Earth, we don't get married by accepting crystals." "I had no idea what the Krithva signified." Her silver eyes widened slightly. "You did not intend to join your life with mine?" "I meant no offense," Jonathan said quickly. "In my culture, marriage follows a lengthy courtship. We get to know each other first." Talia was silent for a long moment, her skin cycling through colors too quickly for Jonathan to interpret. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer than before. "Among the Vexorians, the Krithva is offered only when one soul recognizes its complement in another. I felt this recognition when you spoke our language with such care and respect." She gestured toward the crystal on his chest. That it bonded to you confirms the compatibility. But we barely know each other, Jonathan said gently. Time is measured differently among my people, Talia replied. We perceive the potential of relationships in ways your species cannot. Jonathan sighed, running a hand through his hair. The ambassador believes this could damage relations between our worlds. He is correct, Talia said. The rejection of a Krithva has not occurred in 7 generations. It would be seen as a profound statement about the incompatibility of our species. So I'm trapped, Jonathan said, frustration seeping into his voice. Talia's skin darkened. Is the prospect of association with me so distressing? No. That's not what I meant, Jonathan backpedaled. You're brilliant and beautiful by any species standards. But marriage should be a choice made with full understanding. Talia considered this, then made a decision. I propose a compromise. Among my people, new unions undergo a period of acclimation, 1 full cycle of our 3rd moon. Approximately 60 of your Earth days. During this time, we would reside together and learn each other's ways. And after that? Jonathan asked. If you still wish to dissolve the union, I will accept the dishonor, she said simply. I would rather bear the shame than bind an unwilling soul. Jonathan stared at her, struck by the nobility of the gesture. You would do that? Yes, she said. But I ask in return that you approach our time together with openness. Perhaps what my soul recognized in yours might become apparent to your conscious mind as well. As crazy as the situation was, Jonathan found himself nodding. 60 days to find a diplomatic solution, or to discover if there was something to Talia's belief in their compatibility. I agree to your terms, he said formally. Talia's skin brightened to a luminous violet, hope, Jonathan realized. The crystal on his chest pulsed in response. Then let us begin our acclimation, she said, extending her hand. Husband. The dwelling assigned to Jonathan and Talia occupied the uppermost level of a spiraling tower overlooking Vexoria's capital. Transparent walls provided panoramic views of the city and the distant, violet mountains beyond. For Jonathan, it was both breathtaking and disorienting, the alien landscape a constant reminder of how far he was from home. This space has been adapted for your physiology, Talia explained, gesturing with her lower arms while her upper ones adjusted the environmental controls. The gravity and atmospheric composition will shift gradually between our preferred settings. Jonathan set down his small bag of belongings. You're being very accommodating, considering I'm essentially a diplomatic hostage. Talia's skin rippled with blue-green patterns, amusement, he was learning. And I am bound to a being who considers our union a catastrophe. Perhaps we are both hostages to circumstance. Her response startled a laugh from Jonathan. I didn't expect you to have a sense of humor. Many species assume we are entirely formal because of our diplomatic interactions, Talia said, moving to a console embedded in the wall. But humor is essential for intelligent life. Would you care for nourishment? I've studied human dietary requirements. A section of the wall slid open, revealing a preparation area. Jonathan watched with fascination as Talia manipulated ingredients with practiced precision, her 4 arms working in perfect coordination. You cook? He asked, surprised. The preparation of nourishment is considered an art form on Vexoria, she replied. To feed another is to demonstrate care for their continued existence. Jonathan felt a twinge of guilt. I should learn to prepare Vexorian food as well, then. I would welcome the exchange of knowledge, Talia said, her skin warming to a pleased amber hue. They ate together on a balcony overlooking the city as the second sun began to set, casting long shadows across the crystalline landscape. The meal, a carefully seasoned protein that reminded Jonathan of seafood, accompanied by vegetables whose names he couldn't pronounce, was delicious. Tell me of your work on Earth, Talia said as they finished eating. What drew you to the study of languages? Jonathan considered the question. I've always been fascinated by how language shapes perception. The words we have available determine how we categorize experience. When I learn a new language, I gain access to concepts my native tongue never considered. Talia's skin brightened with interest. This is similar to the Vexorian philosophy of Kivrath, the belief that each new communication pathway creates new possibilities of being. Exactly. Jonathan leaned forward excitedly. Like how your language has 15 words for different types of diplomatic compromise, while English has just one general term. And your language distinguishes between personal and collective optimism, a distinction we lack, Talia countered. Hours passed as they discussed linguistic theory, comparing the structures of their respective languages. Jonathan found himself thoroughly engaged, almost forgetting the strange circumstances that had brought them together. As the last sun set, Talia showed him to separate sleeping chambers. I understand humans value privacy during their regeneration cycle. Thank you, Jonathan said, genuinely touched by her consideration. This has been, not what I expected. Expectations rarely survive contact with reality, Talia replied with what Jonathan now recognized as her subtle humor. Rest well, Jonathan Reed. Over the following days, they established a routine. Mornings were devoted to official duties. Jonathan continued his work with the Earth delegation while Talia attended council meetings. Afternoons were spent together, each teaching the other about their respective cultures. Jonathan learned Vexorian meditation techniques that allowed him to perceive the subtle bioelectric fields that were central to their communication. Talia studied human musical expressions, particularly fascinated by the concept of harmony. Your species creates beauty through controlled dissonance, she observed as Jonathan played recordings of Earth's classical compositions. We find similar patterns in stellar formation. One evening, 2 weeks into their arrangement, Jonathan returned to find Talia in obvious distress, her skin cycling through dark patterns he'd never seen before. What's wrong? He asked, instinctively moving closer. The council session was difficult, she said, her normally melodic voice strained. Some factions question the wisdom of the alliance with Earth. They use our union as evidence of cultural incompatibility. Jonathan felt a surprising surge of protectiveness. That's ridiculous. Our differences aren't incompatibilities, they're opportunities for growth. Talia looked at him, her silver eyes widening slightly. You believe this? Of course, Jonathan said firmly. Look at what we've learned from each other in just 2 weeks. Imagine what our peoples could accomplish together. For the first time, Talia reached out and touched his face, a gesture of profound intimacy in Vexorian culture. Her fingertips left a tingling sensation on his skin. You speak as a true Kivrath, she said softly. A bridge between worlds. The crystal on Jonathan's chest pulsed warmly, and to his surprise, he felt no desire to remove it. Instead, he found himself wondering what other discoveries awaited in this accidental partnership. Maybe that's what I'm meant to be, he replied, covering her hand with his own. The gesture felt natural, right, a connection transcending the vast differences between their species and the strange circumstances of their meeting. Outside their dwelling, the 3 moons of Vexoria rose in alignment, bathing the alien landscape in silver light. Neither Jonathan nor Talia moved away from their unexpected moment of connection, both silently acknowledging that something fundamental had shifted between them. Jonathan woke to the sound of urgent chimes. The dwelling's communication system pulsed with an intensity he hadn't seen before. Beside the control panel, Talia stood motionless, her skin an ashen gray that Jonathan had learned signified deep concern. What's happening? He asked, moving quickly to her side. The Northern Sovereignty has issued a formal protest against our union, she replied, her voice unnaturally flat. They claim it violates ancient protocols regarding the bloodlines of first voices. Jonathan frowned. I thought the Northern Sovereignty was just one of several Vexorian territories. It is, but they control key resources needed for interstellar travel, Talia explained. Their leader, Draxus, has long opposed closer ties with Earth. He claims your species is too unpredictable, too emotional for true alliance. And our marriage gives him the perfect ammunition, Jonathan concluded, surprised by the bitterness in his own voice. Talia's upper arms gestured in affirmation. He demands a full council hearing. If his petition succeeds, our union could be forcibly dissolved, and with it, the tentative trade agreements between our worlds. The crystal on Jonathan's chest dimmed slightly, as if responding to their distress. Over the past weeks, he had grown accustomed to its presence, even finding comfort in its gentle pulsing. The prospect of its removal now felt strangely troubling. "We can't let that happen," he said firmly. "Not when we've made so much progress." Talia's skin lightened with surprise. "You wish to defend our union?" Before Jonathan could respond, the dwelling's entry portal chimed. Commander Patel stood at the threshold, her expression grim. "Mr. Reed, we have a situation," she said, then noticed Talia and nodded respectfully. First voice. "Come in, Commander," Jonathan invited. "I believe we're facing the same situation you've come to discuss." Patel entered, her posture stiff with military precision. "The Northern Sovereignty's challenge is only part of the problem. A transport from Earth arrived this morning." She hesitated, glancing at Talia. "Your former partner, Dr. Natalie Parker, is aboard. She's demanding to see you." Jonathan felt the floor shift beneath him, though the gravity regulators remained stable. Natalie, his girlfriend of 3 years until their bitter breakup just before his Vexorian assignment. The woman he'd once planned to marry. "Why is she here?" he asked, struggling to keep his voice steady. "Apparently, she's been appointed as the Earth Science Division's new xenobiology liaison," Patel explained. "Her assignment to Vexoria was approved months ago." Talia moved slightly away from Jonathan, her skin shifting to a deep indigo that he recognized as withdrawal. "You should meet with her." "I must prepare for the council hearing." "Wait," Jonathan said, reaching for her hand. "We should face this together." Both challenges. Talia hesitated, silver eyes studying his face. "Your former mate's arrival complicates matters. I would not hold you to our arrangement if your heart seeks its previous connection." "Natalie and I are over," Jonathan said firmly, though uncertainty flickered at the edges of his conviction. "Our relationship ended before I left Earth." Commander Patel cleared her throat. "Dr. Parker is waiting in the diplomatic lounge. And the council hearing is scheduled for tomorrow's first sunrise." "Tell Natalie I'll meet her in an hour," Jonathan decided. "First, Talia and I need to plan our response to the Northern Sovereignty." After Patel departed, tension hung in the air between them. Talia's skin patterns shifted rapidly, too complex for Jonathan to interpret fully. "You are troubled," she observed quietly. "I didn't expect to see Natalie again," Jonathan admitted. "Our relationship ended poorly." "Did you love her?" Talia asked, the question startlingly direct. Jonathan hesitated. "I thought I did. But we wanted different things. She was focused entirely on her career, and he stopped, realizing the irony of his complaint given his current circumstances. "You desired a true partnership," Talia finished for him. "A shared journey rather than parallel paths." "Yes," Jonathan said, surprised by her insight. "Exactly that." Talia's skin warmed to a thoughtful amber. "The crystal would not have bonded with you if your soul sought completion elsewhere. This gives me hope." The diplomatic lounge was deliberately designed to accommodate multiple species, with adaptive furnishings and neutral aesthetics. Natalie stood at the viewing portal, her back to the door, blonde hair pulled into the severe bun she favored for professional settings. "Jonathan," she said without turning. This is quite the mess you've created. Hello, Natalie, he replied, keeping his distance. I didn't expect to see you here. She turned, her blue eyes as sharp and analytical as he remembered. Clearly. I arrive for my new assignment to discover my ex-boyfriend has married an alien diplomat. You always did have a flair for the dramatic. It wasn't intentional, Jonathan said, feeling defensive despite himself. And why didn't you tell me you were coming to Vexoria? Would it have mattered? Natalie countered. We haven't spoken in months. Besides, your new wife is the talk of the diplomatic corps. Quite the strategic alliance you've managed. Jonathan felt a surge of anger. It's not like that. Talia is, he stopped, suddenly uncertain how to describe what Talia had become to him. Fascinating? Natalie supplied, her tone softening slightly. I've read her research on comparative xenobiology. She's brilliant, even by their standards. She's more than her intelligence, Jonathan found himself saying. She's thoughtful, considerate, insightful about things I never considered. Natalie studied him with scientific precision. You actually care for her, she said, sounding surprised. This isn't just a diplomatic facade. Jonathan hesitated, the realization crystallizing as he spoke. Yes. I do care for her. Well, Natalie said, her professional mask slipping back into place. That complicates the Earth contingent strategy. They were planning to support the Northern Sovereignty's petition for annulment. What? Jonathan felt the crystal on his chest grow warm with his rising emotion. Why would they do that? Politics, Jonathan. As always. Natalie sighed. But if this marriage is genuine, or becoming so, then perhaps there's another approach. As she outlined the political landscape, Jonathan found his thoughts returning to Talia, facing her own battles in the Vexorian Council. Tomorrow they would stand together before her people, defending a union that began as a mistake but had somehow, in the span of a few short weeks, begun to transform into something neither of them had anticipated. The crystal pulsed steadily against his chest, like a second heartbeat finding its rhythm alongside his own. The great hall of celestial harmonies loomed before them, its crystalline architecture capturing and amplifying the light of the rising sun. Jonathan adjusted his formal attire, a fusion of Earth diplomatic dress and traditional Vexorian patterns that Talia had helped design. The crystal on his chest pulsed steadily, occasionally emitting small flashes of light that matched his nervous heartbeat. Are you prepared? Talia asked, her forearms adorned with ceremonial bands representing her lineage. Her skin rippled with a pattern he now recognized as concerned affection. As ready as I'll ever be, Jonathan replied, reaching out to touch her hand briefly. Natalie says the Earth delegation is divided on how to proceed. Ambassador Wilson wants to support our case, but some still favor dissolution. Talia's secondary eyes, small silver orbs nestled near her temples that she rarely revealed in public, fluttered open, a sign of her agitation. The council is similarly fractured. Draxus has powerful allies. The massive doors swung open, revealing a circular chamber filled with tiered seating. Hundreds of Vexorians occupied the upper levels, their skin displaying a kaleidoscope of emotional patterns. In the lower tier sat the Earth delegation, including Ambassador Wilson, Commander Patel, and Natalie, whose expression remained professionally neutral. At the center of the chamber stood Draxus, leader of the Northern Sovereignty. Nearly 8 feet tall, his skin a permanent metallic gray that reflected no emotional patterns, a deliberate modification that many Vexorians found disturbing. His 6 arms were held in a traditional posture of formal accusation. First voiced Talia and her companion approach, announced the council elder, a venerable Vexorian whose age was evident in the crystalline growths that covered much of her body. The challenge of union legitimacy has been issued by Sovereign Draxus. Let all voices be heard. Jonathan and Talia took their positions opposite Draxus. The crystal on Jonathan's chest brightened, as if responding to the tension in the room. "The laws of our ancestors are clear," Draxus began, his voice a resonant hum that filled the chamber. "A first voice must maintain the purity of lineage. This human cannot fulfill the biological requirements of a true union. The Krithva was offered in error and must be dissolved." Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Talia stepped forward, her posture conveying both strength and grace. "The laws speak of compatibility of essence, not biology," she countered. "The Krithva bonded with Jonathan Reed. It recognizes what ancient wisdom confirmed: souls find their complements across the vastness of creation. Poetic sentiments cannot override practical necessities," Draxus argued. "A first voice must produce heirs. This union denies that possibility." Jonathan felt a surge of indignation. "If I may address the council," he asked, speaking Vexorian with careful precision. The elder inclined her head. "The human mate may speak." "Honorable council," Jonathan began, conscious of every eye upon him. "On Earth, we have many forms of family structures. Biological reproduction is only one aspect of union. The joining of minds, the sharing of purpose, the creation of new ideas, these too are forms of progeny." He touched the crystal at his chest. "When I accepted this Krithva, I did so in ignorance. But in the days since, I have come to understand its significance. Talia and I have created something new, a bridge between our worlds, our ways of thinking." Jonathan turned to face Draxus directly. "You speak of ancient laws, but the oldest Vexorian texts I've studied speak of Kivrath Vmira, the evolution of connection. Your ancestors understood that growth requires change, that new unions bring new strength." A ripple of color passed through the assembly as many Vexorians reacted to the ancient phrase. The elder's crystalline features shifted in what might have been approval. "The human speaks our philosophies with understanding," she noted. "This is unexpected." Draxus's rigid posture intensified. "Understanding does not change biological incompatibility. First voice Talia's lineage would end with this union." "No," Talia said, her voice resonating with sudden authority. "It would transform." She turned to face the full council. "We have discovered compatible genetic structures that could, with modification, allow for offspring. Dr. Parker of Earth has confirmed this possibility." Jonathan glanced at Natalie, who gave a small nod of confirmation. She had mentioned theoretical possibilities during their meeting, but he hadn't realized how far the research had progressed. "Furthermore," Talia continued, "our union represents the future of both our peoples. Already, we have developed new translation matrices based on our shared understanding. The trade agreements would benefit from this deepened connection." The elder raised her arms, silencing the murmurs that had broken out. "The council will deliberate. All parties will withdraw." Hours passed as Jonathan and Talia waited in a small antechamber. Neither spoke much, but their silence was comfortable, born of growing understanding rather than awkwardness. "Whatever happens," Jonathan finally said, "these weeks with you have changed me. I see the universe differently now." Talia's skin glowed with warm colors he'd come to treasure. "As do I. Perhaps that is the true purpose of the Krithva, not to find what already fits, but to create new patterns of being." When they were summoned back to the chamber, Jonathan was surprised to see that the Earth delegation had moved to stand beside Draxus, who appeared to be in deep conversation with Ambassador Wilson. The elder addressed the assembly. "The council has reached consensus. The union between First Voice Talia and Jonathan Reed of Earth shall be recognized as legitimate under the ancient principle of Kivrath Vmira." Relief flooded through Jonathan, the crystal on his chest pulsing brightly. Talia's skin radiated joy in brilliant gold patterns. However, the elder continued, "To honor both traditions, a formal ceremony incorporating both Earth and Vexorian customs shall be performed." And, she turned toward Draxus, the Northern Sovereignty shall lead the scientific exchange focused on compatible genetic development. Draxus inclined his head, his metallic skin gleaming. The Sovereignty accepts this honor. If new life will emerge from this union, it should benefit all Vexorians. As the assembly dispersed, Natalie approached them. "Congratulations," she said, with what appeared to be genuine warmth. "Your genetic compatibility research gave me the leverage I needed to convince the Earth delegation to support you." "Thank you," Jonathan said sincerely. "I never expected that I'd help." Natalie smiled slightly. "Professional integrity aside, you look happy, Jonathan. Both of you do." After she departed, Talia turned to Jonathan, her silver eyes luminous. "Your former mate is honorable." "Yes," Jonathan agreed. "But her path wasn't meant to join with mine." He took Talia's hand. "I think I've found where I belong." 2 months later, beneath the light of all 3 Vexorian moons, Jonathan and Talia stood together in the Garden of Celestial Harmony. Representatives from both worlds watched as they performed a ceremony that blended their cultural traditions, a Vexorian light exchange followed by Earth vows of commitment. The crystal that had once attached itself to Jonathan's chest without his understanding now rested between them, suspended in a field of energy, pulsing with their combined life rhythms. "From misunderstanding to understanding, from accident to choice," Jonathan said, speaking the traditional words they had crafted together. "What began in confusion now continues in clarity." "2 worlds, 2 forms, 1 purpose," Talia responded, her skin radiating patterns of love that needed no translation. "A new path created where none existed before." Together, they placed their hands around the floating crystal, which flared brilliantly before separating into 2 identical gems. One returned to Jonathan's chest, the other to Talia's. As they faced their assembled guests, Ambassador Wilson stepped forward. "The United Earth delegation recognizes this union and the new diplomatic framework it represents. May it be the first of many bridges between our peoples." Later, as they watched the rising of the first sun from their dwelling, Jonathan reflected on the strange journey that had brought him here, from linguistic consultant to accidental husband to willing partner in an interspecies marriage that was reshaping diplomatic relations. "Do you regret accepting my Krithva that day?" Talia asked, her head resting against his shoulder in a gesture she had adopted from human custom. Jonathan smiled, covering her hand with his own. "Best mistake I ever made," he said sincerely. "Though I don't think it was entirely accidental anymore." "How so?" she asked. "Your soul recognized mine, you said. Perhaps on some level, mine recognized yours too." He looked out at the alien landscape that had become his home. Sometimes the heart understands before the mind can translate. The twin crystals pulsed in perfect harmony as the new day dawned on Vexoria, illuminating the beginning of their chosen path together.